Have you ever noticed that, in most arguments, the person who speaks the loudest is rarely the one who wins? In fact, the more you try to prove you're right, the more the conversation falls apart. The more the other person shuts down. And the more you walk away with that bitter feeling of defeat. Even when you know you were right. But what if I told you? There's a silent, almost invisible technique, used in Japan for centuries, and mastered by one of the most powerful figures in the history of capitalism, to win conflicts, without raising his voice, without humiliating anyone, and almost always walking away as the true winner. Today, you're going to understand why arguing is losing, and how this technique completely changes the game. But pay attention. This isn't about cheap manipulation. It's about emotional control, strategy, and a form of power most people never learn to see. Andrew Carnegie was not born wealthy. He didn't come from a powerful family. He didn't carry an influential last name. As a young man, he was underestimated, ignored, interrupted in meetings, and labeled as someone who talked too much. Until he discovered something that changed everything. Backhand index pointing right. Whoever reacts loses control. Whoever controls the rhythm, wins. While other businessmen shouted, pressured, and threatened, Carnegie did something that deeply unsettled his opponents. He listened. But not passive listening. Strategic listening. And this is where the Japanese technique enters the story. In Japan, there is an ancient principle called ma. It means the space between things. The silence between musical notes. The pause between one sentence and the next. The gap that creates tension. The West fears silence. Japan understands that silence speaks louder than any argument. Carnegie understood this early on. In an argument, when someone attacks, accuses, or provokes, the natural instinct is to defend yourself immediately. Carnegie did the opposite. He let silence take over. And that silence created something powerful. Psychological discomfort. Picture this. Someone accuses you unfairly. They expect a reaction. They wait for a defense. But nothing happens. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The silence becomes heavy. At that moment, the other person's brain starts working against itself. Did I go too far? Am I wrong? Why isn't he reacting? They begin filling the void on their own. And often, they expose themselves. This is the first layer of the technique. Backhand index pointing right. Never interrupt an attack. Let the other person fully reveal themselves. But the technique doesn't stop there. After the silence, Carnegie used a second weapon. Even more powerful. He partially agreed. Not with the accusation, but with the emotion behind it. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," he would say something like, "I understand why you see it that way." That instantly disarms the situation. Because the human brain short-circuits. When conflict meets no resistance. No resistance, no fight. No fight, no victory for the other side. Here's the shift that changes everything. Backhand index pointing right arguments are not won with logic. They are won with emotional control. When you argue, you accept the battlefield. When you control the emotional climate, you change the rules. Carnegie used this repeatedly. Aggressive businessmen left meetings exhausted, with the strange feeling they had spoken too much, and revealed more than they should have. Carnegie walked out calm, in control, with the advantage. The third part of the Japanese technique is the most subtle, and the most dangerous. It's called silent mirroring. After listening to everything, Carnegie would repeat part of what the other person said, but as a question. Something like, "So what concerns you most is this?" When someone hears their own words reflected back, the brain switches into review mode. Often, they realize on their own, that they exaggerated, contradicted themselves, or were unfair. You don't need to attack. Their own words dismantle their position. Now pay close attention to this. Backhand index pointing right. Most people lose arguments because they want to win quickly. Carnegie won because he had patience. He understood that silence creates power, that listening builds authority, and that rushing hands over control. This technique works everywhere. At work, in marriage, with clients, with business partners, even with manipulative people. Because it doesn't depend on how others react. It depends on your self-control. But there's one final detail, the most important one, that Carnegie treated as a golden rule. Never humiliate the person you're arguing with. Even when he won, he allowed the other person to leave with dignity. Because humiliated people seek revenge. Respected people seek cooperation. That's not weakness. That's long-term vision. So the next time someone tries to pull you into an argument, remember this. Silence first. Strategic empathy second. Questions instead of attacks. You don't need to win by raising your voice. You win by staying in control. And if this worked for one of the most powerful men in history, it can work for you. Now tell me in the comments, what was the hardest argument you ever lost? And how would it have ended differently if you had used this technique? Because sometimes, true power isn't about speaking louder, but knowing when not to speak.